All right. So, a couple weeks ago, we had a great call with Austin, and afterwards, kind of the reviews were pretty good. I guess people kind of like hearing us talk a little bit, but the predominant questions that came in were people wanted to know more about our time working with Mike Bender specifically. So I think that's a great kind of conversation for us to have and talk about our time both at the academy and how that's kind of influenced where we've ended up and kind of been able to do on both sides of the ball.
Hmm.
So, Austin, why don't you start? You can kind of take it wherever you want. I think we can kind of, you obviously are like the longest lasting
Yeah,
pupil. I think you started with him at what, 11?
11. Yeah. Yeah, I started with him when I was 11 when he was at Timucuan and Lake Mary. And at that time, I hadn't had any traditional lessons, so to speak. I'd practiced a little bit with some local pros, and they've shown me some tips, and they helped me out. But I hadn't had anything even close to what Mike offered me when I started working there. And it was just like such a shock to see the MEGSAs and the MEGSA putting tool and all these kids with good swings that are just out there beating balls all day. It had a
So
really good, really,
we should briefly explain what a MEGSA is.
yeah. So
It stands for most efficient golf swing attainable, and it
you can
literally
putt,
is like it looks like a death trap.
yeah. What's wonderful about them, yeah. Mike invented, and what's great about it is you can use pretty much anything, any tool or any setting with the MEGSA to help you get your body and the club in any position that you want in this during the swing. So even if you don't subscribe to the same method that Mike does, you can still use the MEGSA to make any type of swing change that you're trying to make.
Well, and
Um,
from an instructor standpoint, it makes a ton of sense too, because what it is, we use alignment sticks, shafts, noodles, cones, all these other things. But in a Megza, you can literally, your feet are always in the same spot. It's off on a mat, and everything that you can adjust has a number to it. So that way you can always ensure that it's exactly the same setup every dang time.
yes, all the inputs for every tool that you can put onto it for your setup or for your head position or for the plane, it has a number and it's measurable, and so you can go in day after day and set it up quite easily and just get after it. I mean, Mike definitely put a lot of thought into it, and it is truly one of the best training aids that you could possibly purchase, which is partially why it's so expensive. I mean, it has a lot of components, and I think it's, what is it, about $10,000?
I think it's like 30 or 40, but
Is it really for the full thing? Oh my goodness, yeah, that's way more than I even thought.
Yeah, Chris just threw the link into the chat, but I don't know what they're running for now. I know that there's a couple college teams that have them, and then there's a couple instructors that either have that or there's like the half megs variation as well.
I
So
guess that's
like
probably what I'm thinking of, is like a variation, probably be a
yeah,
little bit
so
cheaper.
but I think that goes to the point about using feedback that Mike does well. And
Mm,
so Mike's background is interesting if you kind of look at it that way. As a player, he kind of saw Ben Doyle before going to Ledbetter. And Mike Adams is a little bit of an influence there. And so if you look at the golf, well, Mac O'Grady, let's not forget.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if you look at those influences, the swing makes a lot of sense. But so does the use of feedback. Because Mike talks about his time with Ledbetter. He once told me a story about the need to exaggerate a move and how um, that was a real eye-opening thing for him as a player. And so to be able to put feedback there to basically ensure that it's happening, um, invaluable.
absolutely. And everything that you will find at the academy is there for a purpose, to serve a purpose, right? It's not, there isn't anything there that's extra clutter.
Mhm.
Mike believes, and sometimes most times has invented everything you'll find at the academy. So like when you go to the academy, one of the things you'll see on the range are these zones. And so you'll see different colored, well, they're just rods in the ground for different dispersion and amount in terms of feet. So if you have the first zone is what, Alex, about 10 feet, 12 feet? Or is it
15. Pitching wedge 15.
Yeah, pitching wedge is 15 feet. So if you hit a draw there, let's just say it's um, a red pole in the ground 15 feet right of the main target line, and then there also will be one 15 feet left of it for if you're playing a fade. So it's intending to start right of the target line, drawing back into and hitting it in that. And so he actually introduced that when I was in high school. That was an idea of his, and that's just one example of the many things he has out there that provides incredible feedback. And considering Mike is such a competitive person, he likes to, note down, how many you put in the zone and to always beat your personal record. And then he also famously has the wedge range, which is, they have concrete blocks that are about 3x3 feet.
4x4.
4x4 feet at 30, 40, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 yards. And there's a board to the left of the wedge range that has everyone's personal records by division. So pro men, pro women, amateur men, amateur women, junior women, junior men. And that's kind of one of the cool things. One of the cool things about being out there is there's such a culture of like constant improvement and constant feedback. And everyone, because it's an individual sport, is kind of on their own path and on their own personal journey. So it's really unlike any place I've ever seen in terms of practice. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Do you ever make the board, Austin?
No.
I think I was on it for 2 weeks.
Well, I might have been on it. No, actually, no. My personal record is 43, and that was never good enough to be on the board.
I had 45 a week after I graduated high school, and Ben's like, "You're an amateur now."
Yeah.
So I got on the amateur one for like, a couple of weeks or something like that. But yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that, everything's measurable. And I think that is what makes your ability to practice efficiently out there, right? That way you're not banging balls for 10 hours and like, what did you accomplish? You don't know.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, maybe you got marginally better at like some club face awareness, but like unless it's measurable, regardless, it's just not the same.
And just as an example of how much is measured in terms of practice performance at the academy, when I first started working with the academy, and Mike would have these junior programs, he brought out this binder, and the binder is one of these thick college like binders that is filled with loose leaf paper and or just printed paper with punched holes in them, and the entire thing is full of drills for every aspect of practice in terms of golf. And not just the drills, but what the realistic expectations in terms of performance are. And then there's always a little line at the end for you to check off and note what your score is on that drill. I haven't worked with any other instructors, but I haven't seen or heard of anything like that. And you can tell that was kind of created out of the dirt, so to speak. Like Mike, a lot of these drills are homemade drills that Mike really liked, and he probably used many of them while he was playing professionally. And then he's had all these years of coaching, 8 hours a day to come up with them. And it's just you could find, no matter what your preferences are in terms of practice, if you were to go through this, like one of these binders, you would find, at least 3 drills for every aspect of the game. You'd be like, I would love to do that drill every day.
Well, and let's just think about how far ahead of the time that was. I went and I've spent some time around Scott Fawcett and now the whole decade revolution, but there was at his seminar in his big slideshow, there's literally an overhead picture of Mike's range. And he's talking about, he's like, if I had a range, I designed a range, I'd do it just like this. And, Mike was doing that, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So that just kind of shows how it's all come full circle in that regard.
Yeah, and these are the kinds of things that you won't see on his Instagram page, which obviously has great content, great following, is the all the little things that go behind the academy. The videos on Instagram are, compilations of lessons he's had over the years and lessons he's currently having. And you get to see kind of his general philosophy and what he'll do with people, in terms of getting them in the right positions. But you don't see the binders. You don't really get a good sense of what the wedge range is, or the zones on the range, or even the MEGSA. I mean, you get a little bit, but um, it's a truly extraordinary place to practice.
Yeah, and so I went down there full time at 16, so I didn't have quite the same background as Austin, but that's why I was kind of placed in the elite academy, which is full time. Austin, practiced there every day, but it was a little bit of a different experience. So I got more of like oh, you're a little late to the party, we're going to give you a crash course. And so Ben Pelicani at the time was the head of that program. And in my first 2 weeks there, I took written tests on the golf swing, not just the golf swing, but how to prepare for tournaments, how your warm up routine should be, what your practice routine. I mean, it was crazy. But like, yeah, we were there taking written tests before we almost did anything else, just so that we had kind of the template, the background. And then speaking of the binders, every day after practice, I had to basically put, if every drill I did, had to record the score in there. We put, we measured everything. How focused were you today? Like things like that. And then a few notes at the end of every day. And that was all kept organized, binder style. That way we could always return to literally everything we ever did.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Doesn't surprise me that you guys had that much of an in-depth, kind of day to day, though. It doesn't surprise me at all. You have tests too, because that's another way to measure,
Oh
your
yeah.
performance and your knowledge of what's going on. And he wants. That's the funny thing. Like, Mike really wants everyone to leave with the full understanding of what he's trying to get across. Um, and
Well, it was the
that's
first instructor because I had previously been in an academy with, let's just say, a former coach of Tiger, and I never knew why I was doing anything.
yeah.
I knew what I was doing, but I had zero understanding as to why.
And that's one of the things Mike has emphasized to me ever since we began working together, is he wanted to get to a point where, or he wants you to get to a point where you have a deep enough understanding of your tendencies, but also the philosophy, to where you'll occasionally need to check in with him and get feedback. But when you're on the road, when you're competing week in, week out, you should really be able to moderate like what's going on, and have a good understanding of how to correct yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so valuable. I mean, that's why so many mini tour players are always down there, because
Yeah.
not only are you getting a lesson, but you're also learning so that you can handle things yourself.
Hmm.
And the interesting part about Mike's tour players is like he doesn't travel really.
Yeah.
I mean, very very infrequently. So his players have to know what, like, very in depth know what's going on, because they can't rely on him to stand behind them hitting balls on the range before the round to fix stuff.
Yeah, and he he's almost gonna be disappointed if, or not disappointed, but a little shocked if you call him up and say, "I have no idea what's going on." He's
Got
he's
experience with that one, Austin?
Yeah, I do. Well, also because a lot of that, when you do have those freak out moments where nothing seems to be going right, you're just in such a stress mode that you're not thinking straight. And he's good at reminding you of the fundamentals and the basics, and emphasizing what your tendencies are. And, also being realistic about the fact that there are just some positions that you're probably never going to be 100% content with, just from, your that's just kind of more of your blueprint. Like, you're not going to have a perfect golf swing, right? I mean, there might be 2 weeks out of my entire career where I was like content with my golf swing. But even then, it's like I know it's not perfect. It's just better than it normally is.
Yeah, and I think that that's also really good because I think people see a golf swing on Instagram and they just whether it's a coach posting it or it's a tour player swing and they just assume like that's perfect. I want to get there so I never have to worry about it again. And
Yeah.
like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah,
Like
because even
it's
those people are they don't feel that way about their swing. They look at it and they see their flaws because they kind of know what their tendencies are, and yeah, they're always working towards something.
yeah, well I always call it kind of working towards neutral and like I've never been there either. I mean, I've
Yeah,
always been a little deep, a little across.
yeah,
I've never not been there. I mean, I know I'm working constantly on getting closer to neutral and I, hit it better as I get closer, but
mm,
that's not, my normal is never going to be perfect.
yeah, exactly. Neither is
That's
really
why
anyone.
all the feedback stations, everything's all there so that we can immediately know if we're too far gone or if it's playable.
Yeah.
I got a good question from Nate. How do you get comfortable enough putting what you're working into play and being confident? And how do you not put something into play you're working on knowing it's not correct?
It's a good question. The basic feedback loop is, analyzing what you're doing wrong, putting a plan together of productive practice that, we talked a little bit about the other week, implementing that plan, and then putting yourself in uncomfortable positions that really test to see whether the work you've put in is effective,
Mhm.
and then evaluating afterwards. Um, it's it's tough when you're playing professionally because especially on the mini tour level because not most people don't have unlimited funds, and they know that if they're not playing well, they're probably just going to be donating to the purse. And so it prevents a lot of people from competing when sometimes they really do need to compete in order to evaluate where they are and make that part of the feedback loop process that improves their game. You need to be uncomfortable as much as possible, and you want to simulate that in practice, but I guess you're never going to be 100% comfortable, especially when you're implementing a new move. So I think you have to begin by kind of acknowledging that, just understanding that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and then putting yourself in those positions that test, the practice and preparation, and then going from there.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I want to kind of take a little bit of a stab on that next one about being somehow playing knowing your swing isn't perfect.
Hmm.
To which I would say, well, before you started working on this, you were still a golfer and you were still probably, at some level you were able to get it around. So it's only going to be better than that. And then in addition, I remember I was getting a lesson white one day and Mike's kind of ripping it apart, as one does, kind of performing some surgery. And he pauses in the middle of it. And I should see if I can find the recording because I have all my lessons, recorded. And he just pauses in the middle of it and he goes, you can win with this swing, right? And I think that that's a really important thing as well, right? Like knowing you can still be kind of irrationally confident, even if it's not
Yeah.
perfect, and you don't have to have a perfect golf swing to compete. And I think that was kind of a wake up call, definitely for myself, because I'm watching my swing kind of, I got A, B, C, and D to work on, but he also looked at me and goes, you can win with this. You should be winning with it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really important thing to understand and kind of see in practice. And I think the hardest thing when making a swing change absolutely is um, committing onto the golf course. Am I going for this feel that I'm working on, or am I just going to hit the ball? And I think generally the answer is just hit the ball.
Yeah. Uh, as a little side story example of that, um, in my senior year of high school, I was about to play in the junior players, and the week before I went up to TPC and I'd been working on getting less depth in my backswing, and I played a practice round and I played horribly. I shot probably high 70s, low 80s. And I remember talking to Mike that I was going to withdraw and not play the next week because I felt like there was so much confusion and conflict over the ball with what I was trying to work on in my swing, and I just wasn't hitting it well. And Mike just convinced me to go play. And I had a great week and I won the tournament the next week. Um, so sometimes your best golf, or at least great golf, is a lot closer than it seems, and part of it is just facing that discomfort, putting yourself out there, and deep down you do have to have some level of trust that things are going to be okay. When you're playing your best golf, it seems like everything can only go well, and when you're playing poor golf, it's really hard to think of anything that can go well. It seems like everything goes the wrong way.
Well, it's like
um,
living or dying on the result, right? And like that kind of
yeah.
goes back to a lot of what we talked about was that a couple of weeks ago about just trusting the process. I mean, whether it's the process for hitting this shot, or the process for preparing for this round, or the process of just continued improvement.
And just like a tiny little example, the mindset of difference between good golf and bad golf is good golf. Let's just say same scenario. You're you're even par through 12 holes. You're not hitting it great. You block it in the right tree, in the trees, right? Good golf mindset is, oh, I can make that work. Bad golf mindset is, oh my God, like my swing feels terrible. I finally like just hit an awful shot off the map. Like I'm screwed, you know.
Yeah,
Same
absolutely.
exact situation, just two different mindsets.
Well, I would say one more thing, and then I got a really good question for you, Austin, and that's I think that a poorly, poor fundamentals, poor mechanics, with a lot of trust, with a lot of commitment, a lot of belief, and being pretty tension free with it is probably going to get a better result than the guy who has great mechanics and is questioning himself, and is tense over it, thinking about either what he's working on or whatever. I mean, I'd rather
Well,
be the guy whose swing looks terrible.
exactly. Well, at the end of the day, you can have a beautiful looking golf swing, but if you have so much stress and, your fine motor skills can kind of break down. And then at the end of the day, your club face awareness is really, one of the most important things when you're competing or just playing golf in general. So with that stress can really alter the way you react. And you'd much rather have a technically worse golf swing, but confidence with that relaxed swing, as opposed to a great golf swing, but your hands all of a sudden aren't returning the club face in the same position at impact because you're so stressed out.
Yeah. So Austin, you and Zach are the only two players off the top of my head that I can think of that have had Mike caddy for you.
Yeah.
What did you experience that you maybe didn't expect in that instance?
I think Mike is someone that teaches on the range a lot, and that's an understatement, right? He teaches
He
probably
lives on the
just
range.
he teaches more than any top instructor on the range,
I
without
think
question.
that I think that I was down there full time for 2 years. And I think every single round Mike played, I played with him, and it was
Yeah.
two.
Yeah, so and I only say that because the truth is Mike has a lot to offer on the course, especially once you've already worked with him on the swing for so long. Once you've really developed your swing, he's probably more useful on course. And so to be able to have him on the course was incredible. I learned a lot. And what was really cool is after the round, he typed up a 2-page Word document of everything he observed, all the feedback, and sent it to me. And he really broke down everything from, the way, like from the pace in which I walk to the length of my warm up, to a bunch of shot selections on the course. And, one of those shot selections that he observed kind of ties back into what I know you really like with Decade now, which is there was a par three. He caddied for me in the Jones Cup in the 17th hole, I believe it's the 17th hole. Is a really tough par three over water, about 220 yards, and it was really cold, damp, February day. The pin was tucked on the front right side, and I told him I wanted to hit a cut 4-iron into the pin, and he's just like, no, like I just like your stock draw 4-iron, just 5-10 paces left of the pin. And I went ahead with my cut 4-iron, and the cut, wasn't going to carry as much in that moment. And I hit it just short right into the water, and I think I made double or triple. And at that time, I really thought that I was better off shaping every shot exactly for what the shot called. Whereas, he believed that, especially on a shot like that, a tough 4-iron shot, you're much better off, trusting the dispersion of your zone, and really just of your shot dispersion more generally, to where you should just play your stock shot, more towards the fat of the green. And I know for a fact that if I played that shot in that moment, I would have made a 3 or maybe a 4, but I definitely wouldn't have made a 6. And over the years, I've really taken that lesson, towards pretty much all my shots, where I'm going to play my stock shot the vast majority of the time, just moving my target line, and try to be a little bit less fancy with it.
Yeah, spot on. Perfect. I think that it's funny because, I play with a lot of, mid handicappers, and, on a lot of tee boxes, they'll say, oh, this is a cut hole. And I'm like, I'm not hitting the cut here. Like,
Yeah,
so who's it a cut hole for? Well, it's a cut hole for the guy who always hits cuts.
yeah,
It's going to be a draw for me. And that's
yeah.
because I know that my dispersion is going to be tighter with the draw than if I try to hit a cut right now.
Hmm.
So why would I make that risk and make the dispersion bigger, because it maybe helps with the shape of the hole, like, and even that's generally arguable.
Yeah, when you think about it, if your stock shot's a draw, and that's what you really hone in on when you're practicing, and you hit thousands of balls a week doing that, it just makes sense to, trust your muscle memory when you're under pressure, and really just do what you're kind of naturally, ingraining. So I think over the course of the year, if you were to choose the shot, especially on approach shots, I think you would do far better over the course of a year, moving the target line to the safer part of the target while hitting your stock shot, than if you took on the shot that, let's just say, the pin calls for in that moment. You're going to short side yourself far less hitting your stock shot with a safer line. And over the course of the year, especially on the bigger tours, you're going to save so many more strokes, because you're just not going to short side yourself, and your errors will be far less.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, it's just like, I like bringing in analogies from other sports. I mean, it's just like baseball or basketball. Like, you might go 0 for 7 and, like, then question everything, but over the course of the year, you might still shoot 40% from 3, rather
Mm-hmm.
than trying to do something weird and where, your average might be 35 for the year, but yeah, you might do better for one day. I mean, it's all about trusting the overall variance for long stretches of
And
time. I mean, the
that
data always
that
backs it up.
I have to say that one of the most important things to take from what you just said there is, I think, is time preference. Um, my caddy has asked me a lot. John Weir has asked me a lot. He's like, if you knew that you would play your best golf this week if you did X, would you do it? And the obvious answer is yes. I know that if I'm going to play my best golf, over the course of the week, over the course of the year, if I just do a couple things, or I do one thing, it just makes sense to do that. But a lot of people that don't trust the process, that don't have that kind of long time preference in mind of just, long-term growth, they don't have those solid fundamentals to ground themselves in. So when things go wrong, they immediately go external to find something to fix what's going wrong in that moment. Whereas if they were more patient with their development, and had an understanding of what they needed to do to be where they wanted to be in the future, they could be more patient in the present, which would allow them to stick with the things that they know will work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and so kind of circling back, not to jump topics too much, but like the Mike caddying for you thing, like
Hmm.
that's a like big commitment. Like, and that's, you
Yeah.
know, he's leaving his academy just to go do this thing, and that's really because he's not just a swing technician, even though I think a lot of people assume that.
Hmm.
I mean, he's going to go whatever extra mile it takes to take it to the next level, to prepare his players for the next level.
Yeah, and when he caddied for me, he didn't caddy for me because I asked him. He caddied for me because he cares and he knew that I needed it, even if I didn't even realize I needed it. He as a teacher, just knew, like, we've worked so much, on the range together, on the practice green together, and occasionally played some golf together, but he'd never, walked 18 holes with me in a tournament condition. So he just valued that as a coach to just learn for himself too how to work better with me. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I remember the very first tournament of my senior year was at Disney, and he came out that day, or that tournament, I think. And what was really funny about that is I had been playing, you know, tournaments against Gilchrist kids for years and never seen Gary Gilchrist before. And Mike comes out there, and within 2 hours, Gary Gilchrist drove out there. But that just shows like Gary could have been out there before, just chose not to.
Yeah, Mike cares. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's something that you can't really replace. As he shows up every day to the academy. He opens it up himself still. Like, you'd think that he'd have other people. I mean, other people definitely help, but he's the first one there every day, and he loves the grind. He just loves it. He lives
Well,
for it.
I so twice in college I went down, you know, to get some work in at the academy, and I just stayed at Mike's house.
Hmm.
And I think one of the first times I went down there, I didn't have a car down there because I'd flown in, and you know, we woke up every morning at like 5:30, drove straight to the academy, opened it up. It was dark for the first like hour, but he was
Yep.
doing stuff. He was, you know, handling online stuff, returning messages for people, all that kind of thing. And then we literally were there until an hour past dark some days, and
Yeah.
that was every day. And then on the drive, you know, back to the house, he would have me read through the PGA Tour leaderboards, and like that and then went to bed. I mean, went to, you know, got some food, went to bed. That's that's the day to day.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Let me see a question from the chat. Um, are there any fundamental differences for teachers that have studied under Mike, like Kyle or Ben, or you know, ourselves? That's a good
Yeah, you
question.
could you could definitely you could definitely answer that better than I can.
That's a really, really good question. So you can learn a lot, and part of the reason why I kind of brought up Mike's background a little bit earlier is you can learn a lot from just knowing where teachers have come from and what they've done. So the short answer there, with let's just use Kyle as an example. Kyle's full swing would more or less match Mike basically perfectly. Now, everybody from an instructor standpoint will have some fundamental differences. I just was on a little seminar call this morning with some really good instructors, and we were just talking about, if we saw this swing, what approach would we take? And like, we all attacked the same thing, but maybe we used a slightly different drill to do it, or whatever, you know. And that would basically be more or less the type of differences that I would say exist there in the full swing. With Kyle, though, Kyle's short game background's a little different. Mike actually does a lot more short game and putting than people realize, but Kyle, you know, as a player, opted to have a different short game and putting coach, specifically Siegman and Stan Utley. And so he does, his is a little different approach in that regard, but that would be kind of how that works, generally speaking, when talking about instructors being, you know, mentor apprentice and that whole relationship. And so Kyle, for example, would match that. pretty much spot on. I know another high level instructor that worked under Mike for a very long time. Swing is basically identical, except he, has slightly altered the way that his players hit cuts. And it's kind of just like a tree, and there's branches that kind of offshoot from each other. And so that would be more so how I describe that relationship and how those how they interact. Austin, would you say that there's anything? I mean, you've also been around a lot of mini tour players, coaches that have worked with and under Kyle, and kind of seen that firsthand.
Yeah, you can definitely tell when you see someone, even, who has worked with someone that's come out of the Mike Bender Academy, that there's some sort of link to Mike. You can tell that even if it wasn't Mike himself teaching them, there are definitely elements in there that are very similar to what you'll see at the academy every day. Part of it kind of just depends for how long that instructor has been working with that professional. There will be a lot more of Mike in that swing if the instructor has been working with them for 5+ years, as opposed to 2 or less years, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's a lot of instructors. You do have to sort of be mindful. There's a lot of instructors who, will call upon use other instructor's name or whatever, and sometimes maybe didn't spend quite as long there as they might lead you to believe or whatever. Because when you're at Mike's Academy, it's pretty frequent that you'll see people follow him around. And Mike's
Mm.
generally really gracious with that, where, hey, if someone wants to come shadow, like, all good. And you see a couple guys with notebooks just literally following him around.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and so the
he
real
enrolled.
question becomes, how much are you really getting from that versus being in the system as a player versus teaching at the academy, or, and there's pretty much a direct correlation there.
Exactly. And part of it too is, how much time is that student spending working on the mechanics in the way Mike would want, for what amount of time, because you it's very hard to even though you can get noodles and maybe have a portable playing board or make your own playing board. It can be very difficult to get the same mechanics work outside of the academy that you can get at the academy. I mean, you can't really replicate the MEGSA and all the tools that you have at the academy. So, someone that might have worked with an instructor that had also worked with Mike, they're getting that information that's very similar to Mike, but they might not they might not have the exact feedback and the same tools. So their swing, it might not be exactly what you'll find at the academy.
So what's really interesting about that, and this is good for players to know too, in a very, very broad sense, almost every drill we do um, is essentially a trace of the plane board. So whether that's a hand noodle, tip out noodle, cone, whatever it may be, it's generally just a trace of the plane board, which is why the location of that feedback station is absolutely critical.
Hmm.
And I think that that's just a good thing to always remember whenever you're doing any drill, um, in that sense. So, yeah, we may not be able to have you on the legit original plane board, but if everything's in the correct spot, it is the perfect kind of simulation of it.
Hmm.
And that's why, checking how you're doing drills is probably the most important job that I have in any of this, because the information itself is good, it's important, but just making sure that things are progressing as they're supposed to, and etc., is kind of the big role there. But yeah, I think that, no, that's a very kind of under discussed part of Mike and the academy, is just how hard he does work there. It's pretty crazy. And I would stay with him because Mike's an Iowa guy. I grew up in South Dakota. But like, for example, when I graduated, I had a couple grandparents who had rarely left rural South Dakota before, and they go down there, and Mike sits and has a conversation with them. They were from on a farm, grew up on a farm, had almost never left the farm. They pop down there, and Mike's just talking to him about, the crop yield that year and all that kind of stuff for like 40
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah, and going back to the playing board, um, you know, I've spent a lot of time on the playing board because I trusted the fact that if I could get my swing on plane, you know, I feel like I will have a good enough hand-eye coordination and, club face awareness to hit the ball as well as I can possibly hit it. And because I trusted that, it made an effort every single day to spend, 15 plus minutes on it. And, and being patient with it, my playing improved and then my ball striking just constantly improved. So if there was any one thing I would recommend anyone that goes to the academy or, can do in their spare time, if you can get a playing board or get your hands on a playing board, um, that is just it's such a valuable tool to use.
Absolutely.
Mike also homemade, he makes those himself too. So if you go to the academy and you see Mike, you can ask him to make you one. He'll do it.
Yeah. So somebody asked where you get the build plans for the plane board. I know throughout time it's kind of popped on and off Mike's website, and just to kind of send you to the right spot, I would check there first. Otherwise, you can email the academy and they will probably help you out,
Hmm.
just to kind of make sure that goes through the right channels. But that kind of leads into, or I should say, another thing that I wanted to talk about that we really haven't yet in a lot of detail. We did a little bit a couple weeks ago, was a little bit more discussion on kind of stats and how you're going to utilize that in your training. And like I said, we kind of brushed over it, but I think that deserves a little bit more of a deep dive, and maybe into how your scoring on your drills relates to your statistical performance on the golf course. So I don't know if you want
Hmm.
to maybe talk about that a little bit, Austin, your experience, and then I can talk about it a little bit from an instructor side as well.
At the end of every year, Mike and I go through what I enter in shot by shot. I've had a shot by shot account for, I don't know, 15 years now. So every round
Now,
I have,
shot by shot is a website, like it's a statistics driven website that Zach Johnson's statistician runs and operates.
yes, yes. And, I've entered every round that I've played since I was pretty much, I think, about 12 or 13 years old into that system, which is really cool because you can go back over the years and, look at what kind of stats you had at 16, 17, you know, 13. And, the algorithms and, the way they measure the stats have changed greatly, and it's gotten better and better, each year. Peter updates the program and makes it better because they do a lot of strokes gain stuff now, which they didn't do when I originally used shot by shot. Um, you know, and so Mike and I at the end of the year will go through each aspect of the game. We'll do it with Peter. Peter, who runs the program, is great. He'll get on the phone with us and we'll run through. It's great to talk to him about it specifically too, because he knows where the pros will fall within his own statistical categories as well. And kind of run through where I'm losing strokes, where I'm gaining strokes, what I've done well that year, what I need to do to maintain what I'm doing well as putting a plan in place to improve in the weaker areas. In terms of the stats, on a day-to-day basis, I have a binder that I have with loose leaf sheets of paper in there, and I handwrite out every stat that shot by shot will I enter my stats in shot by shot, and then shot by shot shoots back out, where I gain strokes. And I'll go through each stat and handwrite it in the book. And then at the bottom of the page, I might have 10, 12 lines. And then I'll also make notes on, if I took anything out of the round. Some rounds I might write one or two sentences like, oh, you did this really well and you need to improve this. But some rounds I'll be more descriptive and talk about a scenario where I really learned a lesson, whether it's like a bad decision-making process or some sort of weird event occurred on the course that I was able to kind of deal with. I know I'm kind of going all over the place here, but the binder where I keep all this information is really useful because at the end of the year, I'll go back and look through it, and it's funny because you actually realize that you remember everything you write in it. You might not remember all the little details, but it's a great way to learn after each round. And so, yeah, it's kind of hard to go into all the stats like off the top of my head because there are a lot of little things I'll write in there, and it would just take forever to cover all of them. But after every round, I guess I've taken in enough information to know what I need to improve that next day. And then at the end of the year, I have so much data to pull from to really have a good sense of what needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from an instructor standpoint, the interesting thing about using statistics well is that we can actually kind of decipher what the issue is even
Mm.
beyond just the pure numbers. So like I like to pretty much start with a lot of my players, that don't use shot by shot or any, really in-depth system. I'll basically kind of start with fairways, greens, putts, maybe up and downs. And you can use that data paired with some of the practice data to really see if they line up, right? If a
Mm.
player is doing a ball striking test, PGA Tour average is 35 out of 50, and they're getting around that number, but then on the golf course, they're only hitting 8 greens, then we know that there's a disconnect there, and then now we can dive into it a little bit deeper. So then the next question I'll ask is, well, now when you're playing, let's track short side versus fat side. That allows us to quickly determine, is this simply a course management error? Or
Mhm.
start tracking short long. Oh, we're simply not picking enough club because your numbers aren't calibrated very well, and you're missing short a lot more than you think you are. So there's a couple different ways to kind of approach the data and utilize it well. But
Those are really good points. And
yeah,
add to that, I bet you find from a teaching perspective, a lot of the time students will think that they're doing one thing poorly when they're in reality, when you look at the data, they're not. It might be something else. Like, for example, let's just say someone thinks that they're chipping poorly,
mhm.
but then you look at their proximity and you see that the proximity is good. The problem is they're just not making a lot of putts from 6 to 10 feet, you
Yeah,
know?
that's a very, very common one. I would say the most common for sure is the player who can do a ball striking test, get the number, and then maybe they're hitting a tour number amount of greens, but they're not scoring well because either their short game's not up to par or they're missing in places that they just can't.
Yeah.
And I think that's so a lot of that isn't even always technical, but just how to manage your spots and be able to kind of get it around, even, because players always, it's interesting because players are sometimes at the same time pessimistic about their development or how they're hitting it, but then when selecting a shot, they're ultra optimistic.
Yeah.
I always find that to be very funny, and I see it in my own game too. I'm certainly just as guilty as everybody else, but I think that's a really interesting kind of thing to look at, because and I sure as heck want you to be confident over the golf ball, but with
Hmm.
the selection of the shot, sometimes we need to make sure we understand what's reasonable to expect, especially depending on how you're playing, how you're hitting it, etc. Be able to tailor your expectations to results both over long periods of time, but also how you're trending. So I think that is sort of a way to really get the most out of your stats. both from a long-term and a more short-term approach, depending on how much time you have available. I have players that, are very upfront, like I'm not going to track every little thing, and that's completely okay. We can take a variation of that
Yeah,
as
a lot
long
of
as we have
people.
just a few numbers.
Yeah, I would say the level of attention I pay to statistics is not something I would recommend almost anyone do unless you're trying to play on the PGA Tour. You know, it's really because it just won't be the best use of your time. If you only have, let's just say, 4 hours a week to play golf or practice golf.
Yeah, so like when I have my players, I try to drill in the PGA Tour average numbers into their head, and if we can approach those, then we're doing our job. And the rest of the scoring has to be coming from somewhere else. Either it's your misses are really, really big, and so when you miss a fairway, it's 2 shots instead of 0.25 or half a shot, and those
Hmm.
add up, and then it becomes, or you're short siding yourself, so you missed a green, but you missed it in a spot where that's an extra half shot because you're going
Yeah,
to get up
yeah,
and down, and so it's all about, aside from the technique, it's all about chasing those quarter and half shots and trying to pick them all up.
hmm, yeah,
Right. And I think that more than anyone probably applies to yourself and other tour players, because I mean the margins are so small that
exactly.
two shots in a 4 round event, that's half a shot per round, can completely change your season.
Yeah, the ability to reduce bogeys or worse at the top level is far more important than increasing birdies.
Yeah, there's some crazy stats about like a scratch handicapper or a scratch player and like a 10 handicapper only making like a difference of one birdie per round, and the other 9 shots are all bogey avoidance.
Yeah, that does not surprise me.
Yeah, I think that's, and so if there's a few things that I want all my players to understand, it starts with having really good expectations of where you are versus where you should be. I've had players who are 2-3 handicap and they're hitting more greens than PGA Tour average, and they think, or their understanding is that they are needing to hit it better, and that's not where the priority needed to lie in order
Mm,
to get it under. So then it becomes kind of the conversation. Well, do you want to hit it better, or do you want to utilize the time to shoot lower scores?
yeah,
Um, and that's actually something that players sometimes want to think about. There are players who just want to hit it better, and that's where they get their enjoyment out of the game. And if they're not competing, then that's what kind of gives them that high, and that's what we'll chase. But I think that's a really, really good kind of thing to consider. So if we can understand our expectations, but also where we can pick up shots after a round, we're in a really good spot moving into the next one. And so, yeah, and I think that more or less that's probably what you're thinking about in different terms after every tournament round. Let's say you
oh yeah,
shoot,
yeah.
let's say you shoot 73 in the first round.
Hmm. Yeah,
What's changing, or what caused you to be a couple outside the cut line?
the first thing I'll go to look at is what I call my process percentage, which really has to do with making sure I did my routine flawlessly and was committed to the shot. But I also, what I added in there to be a little bit more picky was whether or not I made the right decision. Um, and what I find is the rounds that I play that are good are always 92% or better. And then it's I don't think it's ever happened where I've had a round under 90% that I've been happy with. So that's almost like more directly linked to my score on that given day than anything.
Yeah, funny enough that circles kind of all the way back to when we were talking about the technical side of it, right? I'd rather be bought into my process
Hmm.
and maybe not be firing on all cylinders as a ball striker than vice versa.
Yeah, yeah. You might have a few days where you have a high process percentage and might not score that well, but you'll never have a day where you have a low process percentage and score well. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Mike asked about systems like Arcos being able to track and be good for stats without being completely focused on it during a round. And I think Arcos is great. There, we've actually been doing some things kind of behind the scenes to partner with them. Um, a couple of our other instructors have been more hands-on with that since I have my other commitments. But yeah, they all really like it. I think Arcos is great at telling you how you're hitting it. I'm not 100% sure, and I could be completely wrong on this. I'm not 100% sure how well it translates decision making for players, like I think that some other stats can do for you.
Mm-hmm.
But if what I like to do, and I just played an event. What I did is I just take that little box because I don't play full time anymore. I don't keep everything, all my data all the time anymore. But what I do is I put my score in the bottom left part of the box. I put my putts in the bottom right. Top left, I say whether I hit the fairway or not. Top right says whether I hit the green or not. And then the middle, I'll, kind of make a little check whether I got up and down or not. And
Mm-hmm.
then maybe just outside the box, I'll write how many feet away my first putt was. And I think that I think if you're going to keep simple stats, that doesn't take me really any longer than just writing down my score on the card.
Yeah, that's the basics and those.
Maybe a
Yeah,
second or two, and after the round, they can be added up like that, and now you've got a pretty good understanding of what you did that round. And I
yeah,
always
those
find it super
basics.
interesting when you finish a round and you go, God, I hit it well. And you're like, oh, I only hit 8 greens. And I mean, it's just a kind of a microcosm of the understanding that we don't always perceive exactly what's happening. I've had rounds where I felt like I hit it great and I added up and I hit 9 greens. And I've had rounds where I felt like I hit it terrible and I added up and I hit 14. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just a good way to, it's kind of like the full swing, separate real from or feel from real, and
Mm-hmm.
be able to actually have some data that you're basing things off that's a little away from the feels, because feels are good. I want players to feel good, but we also need to be cognizant of where we actually stand in some regard,
There
kind
are
of
any
bring it
questions?
back to reality, so to speak.
Are there any questions you want to answer?
I don't think there's really anyone. If anyone's got anything, send them in. We're happy to go anywhere with it. So Chris is gonna try to get his hands on a plain board plan. I know Nate is in here. Nate's built one himself.
That's
Um, that's I think I got 3 guys who have built plain boards in the last year. And I think they've all agreed they're very beneficial because I mean it's literally a trace of what you're trying to do in your swing.
yeah. It's Matt Wilkes, one of Mike's assistants. He told me one time it's very simple because this is just such a Matt type thing to say. He's like, you're either on plane or you're not. It's like, yep, that's right.
um, Mike would like an example of how you approach fixing swing problems during a playing season. And before I let you hop on that one, Austin, I absolutely loved. I clipped it. I put it on Instagram. The kind of 3-3-3 philosophy that you described a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, and I'll let you describe that one again. But I've found myself um, kind of remembering that I used to do 5-2-1, and I felt
Yeah,
like I kind of got away from it a while. So like as I was preparing for an event last week, I literally that's exactly what I went to.
yeah. Throughout the course of the year, I will work on the fundamentals. You know, when you think about it, the easiest way to get to develop bad habits when you're playing a lot of golf is just by making little changes to your setup. You know, whether it's, ball position, alignment, tilts, head position, eye line, grip, posture, weight distribution. Also, I kind of go through the checklist. I have a checklist on my phone. I think I came up with like 30 something different things you can possibly think of when it comes to the setup. It might even be more than that, but I'll go through that checklist and ask myself, is there, if I'm getting off, that's the first thing I go to, because chances are the way your body's moving throughout the swing, with how much work you put into it, it's not going to change that much, but it could be changing a lot based on how you're set up to the ball, to compensate for it. So that's the first thing I'll do. And then I have my basic Mike Bender, like pump drills, take it to the top, stop, work the hands down at the ball, back up to the top, work the hands down to the ball, then kind of kick it through, hold it off, and then finish. So I'm pretty much just focused on the fundamentals and then some basic plane work and some basic sequencing work. And I find that to me is the best way to at least maintain what I would need to maintain throughout a lot of playing, because when you're playing a lot, you can kind of alter your ball position and your setup in order to really adjust for the conditions. So when you're playing, your alignment and your ball position, your weight distribution, certain things can get off. What for me, a tendency for me is my tilts. I tend to get the ball further back while adding more tilt. So I'm mindful of that, and I really try to keep it simple. And then going back to the 3-3-3, which then goes into a 1-1-1, it's, if you have just, 10, 15 minutes on the range after a round, that's one of the hardest things when you're competing is, you get to the course about 2 hours before your tee time, then it takes 5 hours to play. So by the time you're done, it's been 7 hours of just constant grind. You don't want to spend 40 minutes or, an hour at the range. So to ingrain a feel, the best way to do it that I've found is, you know, let's just say you want to, work on your mechanics. So you take a 7-iron out, and the first three swings, you're working on the feel that you want to create to really work on your mechanics. So those first three swings are mechanics. Then you'll hit three more shots, and those shots will be your stock shot while just being mindful of the mechanics, not really worrying about the result, focusing on implementing what you just worked on in your mechanics. And then the last three are performance. So kind of simulating that on-course experience where you go through your whole routine and, you perform it like you would on the course, and then, kind of take note of how your performance, improved or worsened, and then do that again, and then finish with a 1-1-1. And to me, that's the best way that I've found to kind of ingrain a new habit or just kind of work towards something, the mechanics you want, while also, focusing on what matters at the end of the day, which is being comfortable executing your stock shot and getting a good result.
Yeah, and let's talk about those last three shots a little bit more. Where you're basically in tournament mode, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of basically where you're at. Now, we also talked a couple weeks ago about your swing thought on the golf course predominantly being kind of maybe where your head is, etc. Now, that's not
Mm-hmm.
even always something that you're working on from a technical perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're relying on to, whether you want to say quiet your mind, give you something to think about, focus on over the ball. So that's what you're utilizing in those last three, even if that's not what you're working on from a mechanical perspective.
Correct. Yeah, because you need to be consistent with your swing thoughts to, be able to help quiet the mind. And you're really just focusing on those swing thoughts to create like positive reinforcement that gets you away from a what if type of mindset, get you out of the outcome and more towards, what can I do to create the result? More of a 1+1 = 2 rather than starting with two and then being stressed working back to the ball. It's like, well, I know if I do this, it's going to be good.
Right. I think that it's so powerful for a player to find a feeling that they can rely on. I mean, I pretty much have stolen mine straight from Jack Nicklaus. Jack Nicklaus was kind of keep the back to the target in transition. And throughout my playing career, there were tons of times where I was working on something completely different from a technical perspective. But when I was on the golf course, that was it. That was
Yeah.
That was all we were focused on. Right. And the rest of it, we just relied on what we had done in practice and it, eventually transferring over.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really, really powerful. And it's always interesting when a player stumbles upon it as from a teacher's side, because they'll stumble upon a feeling that they can always kind of return back to. And it kind of becomes my job to say, okay, remember okay, when things are going sour, remember that feeling that we had last time we were playing well? That's not even what you need to focus on in your technical work right now, but that's what we're going to rely on with you on the golf course.
Mhm.
Because I like to kind of tell players, like, once you're on the course or you're in tournament mode, the swing's not changing, really. I mean, you can sort of override it sometimes, maybe, but like you're swinging your swing at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're working with what you brought. So let's
Mhm.
get the most out of it. So I like to kind of describe it either as like, that's time for the exam and we can't study for this isn't an open book test. We have to study
Yeah,
beforehand. And then once you're there, like, you're just going to answer the questions to the best of your abilities that day. And
exactly.
some days you're going to get 100 and maybe some extra credit too. And other days, you're just going to have to, guesstimate on a couple, or that's going to be how it goes. So I don't know. I think that all of that is really, really good stuff for players to remember and understand.
I agree.
All right. You got any more questions or anything specifically that you want to hit, Austin?
I don't think so. I think we hit a lot today.
Yeah, I know it was a little bit of a different type of conversation. And part of that's a testament to everything we covered during the first one. But I
Yeah.
think that, that we kind of were just texting a little bit beforehand and found a topic that, resonated from both sides of ours. I know a lot of people reached out to me and wanted to hear a little bit more about that experience. And so that's where we ran with it. But if there's anything ever, if we ever do these again, whatever, I'm always open to other topics because there's pretty much an endless supply of things to,
There.
dive
Yeah.
into.
Exactly. Yeah, and I guess to conclude, yeah, I mean, I think what the theme was pretty much, what is it really like, kind of being at the Mike Bender Golf Academy, and what are some of the things that Mike does behind the scenes that you might not really notice if you were just to view his Instagram page. Um,
I get a
yeah,
lot of comments on the Instagram page these days now, and it's funny from our perspective because when we were there was no Instagram page.
yeah,
So it's always funny when
yeah.
people that
I'm,
I didn't even think
I'm
knew who
actually,
Mike was are talking about following him for a long time and blah blah, blah. I'm like, I mean, we didn't even, that's not
I
how, I
know,
mean, that wasn't my experience there.
I'm glad that he didn't have his Instagram when we were there. He would have, how much we would like, we were featured on there, and I like being featured on there, but it's, you know, we did, I guess it's just, knowing that Mike has 320,000 followers, and just like, not just followers, but like very dedicated fans too.
Yeah, they're pretty rabid.
Yeah, it's funny.
No, if the comment section there, you can always find some good discussion in those comment sections these days.
Yeah, maybe the next one of these we pull some out of the comments on Mike's page, see if we can answer it.
Yeah, certainly. It might be I bet that would, yeah, we could dive into some really interesting rabbit holes. And something we didn't even dive into
No.
is all the other people that are at the place now that are amazing. I mean, Cheryl's like, I think Cheryl is like one of my best friends, and she's a top 50 instructor in the country and is the director of instruction out there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could talk. Cheryl is just an impressive person. The fact that the academy has Cheryl and Mike is awesome.
Well, and Scott Shepard's top 50 personal trainer out
Yeah,
there. I
yeah.
mean,
Scott Shepard too. I mean, that guy. He. There's a culture though at the academy. Like Scott Shepard and Cheryl both. If I needed anything from them, I could text them right now and they would, go out of their way to help me. Just
Oh, I've called
genuinely,
upon them more than I ever have deserved to.
genuinely good people that want to help.
Yeah, 100%. All right, guys. I know it is, what is it today? Thursday evening. We'll let you guys go. But thanks for hopping on. Having people on here always makes things a little bit easier and better. Having questions to kind of refer to and all that. So if we get one of these done again, highly recommend hopping on.
Yeah, thank you
so much,
guys.
Austin.
I appreciate you guys tuning in. I enjoyed doing this.
Yeah. All right. Well, that means we can maybe rope him back again, guys. Thank you so much.
All right, bye guys.